demanded that all the people that were in charge of the local cities and Jerusalem and all those areas, they had to bow down and worship the Greek gods. He was forcing them to do that. And a lot of them did. But then there was a guy named Mattathias, and he refused to obey. And that resulted in him killing another man that had agreed to worship the Greek gods. And after that happened, a full-scale revolt broke out. The Maccabee revolt or something of that nature, and it was named after this guy's son. He put his son in charge of the army, and the name Maccabee means hammer. So he called him the hammer. And he was put in charge of taking back Jerusalem, and they did. So now we're getting closer to the time of Jesus. Jerusalem was taken back by the Jews from that period, from 167 BC until 63 BC. So at that time we see, again, here comes the Romans back into control after 63. So imagine what's happening to the people in that time. And I'll think about, even today in the Middle East, do they have long memories? Those people over there, they remember stuff from centuries before. Their memories are 400 or 500 years at the most, and just don't go back that far. But they hold a grudge for centuries. All right, I don't know why it's different over there, but it sure seems to be, doesn't it? And I think that also has a part in what all's happening here. Think about how these people felt about all this history. How did that affect how they thought and how they operated? How did that influence their culture as all these different groups keep coming in, leaving, coming back, bringing in different beliefs, bringing in different stuff? So what do you think Jerusalem would have been like? You know, been a lot of diversity in thought, wouldn't there? From all these different influences over time. So it was sort of a, to use an American term, a sort of a melting pot of a lot of different cultures, okay? And that's the kind of environment that Jesus is walking into in Jerusalem. There's a lot of Jews there, but there's a lot of other things there too, and a lot of other influences and ideas. So the Romans take back over, and they install Herod as sort of a ruler, but really the true power rested in Rome, didn't it? He was just sort of a puppet. You know, we see those kind of rulers today in certain countries where they're in charge, but we all know there's another country that's telling them what to do. And that's sort of what Herod's role was. So it's easy just to see how it got, everything was much different. There was a lot of different ideas floating around in Jerusalem. So Jesus comes into that scene, so to speak. And I thought about this and this is before we get into the text. Here's a question for us. Are we influenced by the society we live in today? You know, we want to say no, don't we? All of us in our hearts, we want to say, nah, I don't go for any of that stuff. That's not me. But even me and Polly, we were having a discussion on the way to church this morning, and we were talking about there's a church that meets at East Robertson High School every Sunday. All right, so our first gut feeling in our mind is like, why is that happening? But if we go back in time, we think a lot of churches used to meet in schoolhouses 100 years ago. We are influenced by the things that go on around us, don't we? And we don't even realize it. Sometimes it just sneaks in, and because of what's said to us so many times, we start to absorb some of that into our own thoughts and ideas, don't we? And so I think these people have been influenced by all these things that were going on around us. And I think we sort of got to guard against that. I think we really try to do that in the church. We try to guard against being influenced in negative ways by the things that are going on around us. But, I put down here, do you think or feel differently about anything than you did when you were a child? I can think of a lot of things that have changed in my mind, or how I just view something. I may still think it's wrong, but my view of it is not maybe as harsh as it used to be, because society has influenced me in a bad way. And that's sad, but that's the truth for all of us, and we got to guard against that, don't we? So that's the environment we're rolling into. All these people have been influenced in all kinds of different ways. Jerusalem has sort of been prepared. And last week we left Jesus at the garden. He had just been taken custody in the garden. So we're going to start today at Matthew 26, verse 57 and 61, and we're going to look at the trial. So he's been taken from the garden, and this is where he was taken. So 26, 57 through 51. And those who laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last, 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus said to him, "It is as you have said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, "He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard it, his blasphemy. What do you think?" And they answered and said, "He is deserving of death." And they spat in his face and beat him. And others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ. Who is the one who struck you?" So this is the trial here. This is the opportunity for them to sort of set Jesus up, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it. I think it's interesting here that, they go to the home of Caiaphas, the chief priest. But what's interesting to me is that, all this was planned. Number one, it's nighttime. All right? Most people probably would have been tired from the activities of the day and would have been asleep somewhere. And they get to the house, and the scribes and the elders are all assembled there. They knew he was coming, didn't they? They knew exactly what was fixing to happen. All this was laid out and planned. It was an elaborate plan. It was no accident he was taken at night, because they didn't want people to see him being arrested. There were still a lot of followers of Jesus in town, so they didn't want no uproar about that. So they made sure it was done during the night, during the darkness, so they could hide it. The only disciple that follows him is Peter. So I know James and John were with him there when he was praying. They didn't follow. We don't know exactly where they went. Maybe they were sort of fearful of what was going on, didn't know what to do. I think there would have been a lot of confusion. I could understand whatever they did. It would have been a human reaction to the whole situation. But they didn't follow. But Peter follows at a distance. And he enters into the courtyard of the house of Caiaphas. Now apparently these chief priests and guys that were in charge, they didn't just live in a little hut out on the side of town. They lived in a fancy palace. And they had walls and they had gates, just like people that's in charge today do. They have walls and gates, don't they, to keep people away from them. And he was able to get himself into the courtyard. He wants to know what's going to be happening. He wants to hear the end of the trial. He wants to know what's happening to Jesus. But he sits down with some people that are not friends of Jesus and warms himself by the fire while he's listening to all this. These guys testify about Jesus. Now he could destroy the temple in 3 days. After there's this parade of people, they can't prove anything against him, and they come in and take something out of context that Jesus has said, and they, very importantly, have 2 witnesses for that. John, in John chapter 2, 18 through 21, is speaking about this, and the statement they used to convict him with is a statement he made when he was cleansing the temple, the money changers and all the vendors. And in John 2, 18 through 21 we read, "So the Jews answered and said to him, 'What sign do you show us since you are doing these things?' And Jesus said to them, 'Destroy this temple in 3 days, I will raise it up.'" And then John explains that then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build the temple, and we'll raise it up, and you'll raise it up in 3 days." But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Jesus was talking about his body being raised from the dead. He wasn't talking about the physical temple that's on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But they took that out of context, used that as a pretext to convict him. And it's very important that they use 2 witnesses to do that. Why would that have been important? Numbers 35:30, we read this. "Whoever kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the testimony of witnesses. But one witness is not sufficient testimony against a person for the death penalty." They knew exactly what they were doing, didn't they? Okay? They used the law, they used the provisions in the law to be able to set him up so they could punish him with death. All this was prearranged and planned. So about that before we move on to chapter 27.
John was there with Peter.
He was?
He was. John 18:15. "And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest."
Okay.
The disciple is John.
So John was there. Okay.
John was with him.
Well, that's good, because I know, John was at the crucifixion, and so that makes sense that he would be there. So good to know. Matthew 27 through 31. "Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And when they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, and saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they spat on him, took the reed, and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off of him and put his clothes on him and led him away to be crucified." So here we have another place mentioned that maybe you do know, maybe we don't know what exactly it is. But it says they took him to the praetorium. So I looked that up, and the origin of the word here originally was the tent of a Roman general. So a place of authority, so to speak. And over time, the term became synonymous with the headquarters of any Roman official. It was also used to describe the homes of those people, the bodyguards, or the barracks that housed the Roman soldiers. So I think in this case, because there's this large group of soldiers all around, it seemed like in this case we're talking about the barracks, or maybe it's a combination of that. Maybe they all lived where the general was housed or whoever was in charge. But it was a place where the Romans gathered to I guess, their little space in town, their place. So I would assume it would be like their barracks is where they went. Before he got there, he had already been scourged and beaten. And Matthew tells us when he arrived, he's wearing the clothes that he had on. And it took those clothes off and to put the scarlet robe on him to mock him. It said they gave him the reed to hold in his hand like it was a scepter. And they put the crown of thorns on his head to make him look like a king. And then they mocked him, spat on him, hit him, mistreated him basically, and laughed at him. I think in our minds we can all visualize what that looks like. We've all seen those kind of things happen in our life to somebody, haven't we? Especially with kids doing stuff like this to other kids, right? Happens a lot, unfortunately, but that's being a kid, I guess. But in this case, we're talking about Jesus. And we're talking about people doing this to the Son of God. Just terrible. It's terrible to think about all the things that are happening this day. After that, we read about Jesus and his walk to Golgotha, how Simon of Cyrene helps carry his cross. And after being placed on the cross, we read the following. And now from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those who stood there, when they heard that, said, this man is calling for Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and offered it to him to drink. The rest said, let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. So it was the 6th hour. So when would that have been in their sense of keeping time? It would have been about noon. Midday. Now, it's amazing to me that people at this point are still mocking him. Because we know that things were starting to happen. All right? Darkness arriving in the middle of the day. How does that happen? Yeah, unless there's an eclipse. And what if there was an eclipse at that time? Wouldn't that even be more amazing? That God had the timing to make this happen exactly when Jesus was about to die on the cross? The timing would have been impeccable, wouldn't it? So even if you wanted to explain it away as an eclipse happened, that's still even more amazing to me. Because they don't just happen every day, do they? All right? So people are still not understanding what they're seeing. I think it's interesting the words that he said, and I really, and this is just what I've always thought, and as I read this was one of the things that people said that people understand this to be what Jesus meant when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? To me, and this is be open for opinion here, but I've always felt like that was when Jesus basically was taking on the sins of the world, and for me it seems as if God just could not look at that. It was too hard for even God to imagine this happening, and I feel like that's what Jesus was trying to say. There's other ways to look at that, but in my mind, that's what it seems like to me, is that it's almost as if God had to turn his head for just a second because he just could not bear what he was seeing. Yeah. Yep. And again, and we'll talk about this in a minute, some of these guys that created this situation should have known that, shouldn't they? They should have seen what was happening all around them. So it's just amazing to me that as things went on, how some things didn't change. How people didn't see what was happening around them. What else happened around them? Our book suggests, and I thought this was a good way to say it, it suggests that even nature itself was crying out, even the creation, because when you read in verses 51 through 53 of chapter 27 in Matthew, he says, "Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom. The earth quaked, and the rocks were split. And then even more than that, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the graves after his resurrection, and they went into the city and appeared to many." Can you imagine being there for that? That's a lot of stuff happening all at the same time, isn't it? All this stuff's going on. And that's just mind-boggling to me. Can you imagine seeing, Uncle Ted, who's been dead for a year or two, and all of a sudden he's walking around town talking to everybody?
He'd want his inheritance back.
Yeah. I'm telling you, I think at this point I'd have become a believer, all right? I don't know how much you got to see to believe. All right, these folks got to see everything. But yet, it doesn't seem that it shook any of them to some degree. I'm sure it did for some folks, but I put down, can you imagine being one of the Jews that called for his death? Now you got to know that some of the same people that were down there yelling, "Crucify him, crucify him," probably went to see the crucifixion. What were they thinking when all this happened?
What have we done?
Yeah, what on earth have we done? We have messed up here. How would you have felt if you were one of those soldiers that we talked about earlier that mocked him and spat on him, hit him, made fun of him? It'd be a humbling experience, wouldn't it? To see all this happening around you. Matthew records the centurion that was watching him, who said in verse 54, "So the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that happened, and they feared greatly, saying, 'Truly, this is the Son of God.'" I think they saw the light a little bit, didn't they? All right. I don't know. We don't know what happened to them after that. I would hope that they became believers and were followers. I don't know. But for just a moment there, they realized what is going on. So it's just hard to believe having what it would have been like to be there. Not only just seeing it, but experiencing it, what is all around them. So it was obvious that Jesus was who he said he was, wasn't it, after all this happened? So I put down, what excuse could the high priest and the Jewish leaders have had with all these great wonders happening around them? What did they change? Not that we know of. There's no record of them changing anything about what they were doing. What did they do? They probably tried to play it off as some big hoax. And then they tried to say, well, it was an eclipse. That just happened at the same time, Just a coincidence, all that happened.
They tried to play off the resurrection that way, so why wouldn't they make some sort of the same accusations about the miraculous events surrounding his death?
Yeah, they didn't change anything. Even after he rose from the dead and he appeared to people for over 40 days. He was making appearances, and yet they were trying to act like it didn't happen. I just don't understand how you could do that, how they played it off as a hoax and went about their business. I put down here, I said, sadly today, many are just like those leaders were. Now, we don't have darkness and earthquakes and, dead folks coming out of the ground and walking around town talking to people. But what do we have? We have God's Word. We have a written account of everything that happened. There's a lot of evidence to prove that those things happened, that Jesus lived. There's a lot more reasons to believe than there are reasons not to believe. Yet people today do just like these guys did and try to play it off as some kind of big fairy tale or some story, and that it's not true. People don't change, do they? That's the sad reality is people don't change the way they react to things. Everything that happened to him is recorded for us. We can see when we look outside and all around us all the beauty and wonders of God. There's all kinds of reasons for us to believe. And, even at the crucifixion, there was all kinds of things to help them to understand what was going on. So I think that's the lesson for us is to keep our mind focused on God and what He's done for us, the sacrifice that was made there, and how difficult it was even for God to see that happen, and understand that we need to share that with other people so that they can, reap the benefits of being a Christian. Next week, we're going to be looking at the final lessons in this series, which is the time that Jesus spent on the earth after His resurrection and until the ascension. What kind of things do we know about that period of time? We're going to be talking about that, and then that'll wrap up our lessons about Jesus was here or the places He went. So I've enjoyed it. I don't know about y'all. I've enjoyed reading and studying. It's been fun to sort of take a little different look at some of the things, learn a little bit of the history. So I've had a great time presenting it, and I hope it's been beneficial to you guys. Look forward to seeing you next week.